Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me today to be talking with one of India's foremost historians of science as well as political history, whose writings on Bhagat Singh and science and Ishtihad I've always admired your writings since a long time. And your recent book, which I finished reading, it's a recently released book. Just finished reading it, is this book,
Yeah.
biography of Maulana Azad. I had the honor of attending the launch as well, and I was uh, really honored to be among such luminaries. It was a great launch. Thank you for joining me, Professor Habib.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to start by talking about history in general before we get to the book, which we'll talk about in some detail.
Yeah.
What do you think about the state of history in contemporary India?
Actually, it's not a very happy state, and we all know why it is so, because history has become almost a political tool, and so we don't really study history for the sake of studying the past or understanding the past, and to learn lessons from the past, or to unlearn lots of things which we should, because past is not only to learn, you have to unlearn several things, because you are in a different world. So when you go ahead on the way, you have to leave lots of things. But unfortunately, some of us have begun living in the past. So when you start living in the past, then the question of learning or unlearning doesn't arise. Then you begin actually to see your present in the past. You start wishing, like you say in Urdu or Hindi, Kash, we would have had something like this. Our present would have been like you imagine. So there's something like this which is happening, where people have started imagining the present in the context of their political interest, which means that you play around with the past as a matter of convenience, and so any rigor in that understanding of the past obviously disappears, because you have already set an agenda. You go with preconceived ideas. This is what you want to see in the past, and you start imagining it. So that is something what is happening today, and which is unfortunate. Shouldn't have happened, and some of us have been trying to engage with this sort of misreading of the past, which is happening. But it's a very difficult task, because everything which the state owns, or institutions which state runs, speak the language of the state. And so understanding or reading of the past will depend on how the state wants to see it. So this is something broadly we are watching, and I think it's not a very happy situation.
You talked about misreading history. One of the conversations that we're having today is on the rewriting of history. The recent
Yeah.
example is the fact that Tipu Sultan was not defeated by the British, according to the according to the ruling party. And the claim there is that, we've had Nehruvian history for a long time, whatever that means, and we need an antidote to that. And the antidote is uh, it presented as a sort of challenge to the hegemony. So I'm wondering what you think of the attempts that many so-called public intellectuals have made to rewrite history that suits the narrative of the present establishment.
Actually, rewriting is not a problem, because history has been rewritten several times. There are so many historiographies which are available to us, and each time history has been written. The point is, when I can give you some examples, like we began with the British colonial model of history writing, and before that we had court historians who left behind histories of ancient courts, medieval courts, because writing was a privileged vocation. Not everybody could write. It was not like today, when anybody could read and write. It's a very elite project, reading, writing. Even now, it's not a very project of a common people. And it was not so at all during the ancient and medieval times. Not only in India, world over. Now, I will not go back so much into the past, but if you begin with the modern period, from the coming of the British, we had a model of the colonialists or the Orientalists who try to understand India, try to understand the colonized people, and to understand them or to govern them better or to exploit the colonized world better. They created their own history. No? And obviously that history had lots of problems. After independence, even before independence, large number of nationalist political leaders, those political leaders were not like the leaders we have today across parties. These are pygmies. Those leaders were stalwarts, who wrote, who thought, who engaged with the past. And you can begin with Jawaharlal Nehru, who was very prolific, wrote Discovery of India. He discovered India not for the world, like Columbus discovered America or Vasco da Gama discovered India as a colonial project. Nehru discovered India for himself and for the people. Similarly, there were a large number of people, nationalist leaders from Lajpat Rai to Bal Gangadhar Tilak, even before Nehru, and even Gandhi, who tried to understand India. They were not trained historians, but they were people who tried to engage with our past. Then came a period when we got independence. Then there were nationalist school of historiography, when people tried to distance themselves from colonial project, from Vincent Smith's history, from Eliot and Dowson's history. All that history was behind us. We had historians like R.C. Majumdar, who was a right-wing historian. We had Yadunath Sarkar, who was again a right-wing historian, if you want to slot him or slot them. Then we had a large number of historians who came from the left background. If not committed, politically committed people, but they had a sort of
Marxist
commitment to Marxist ideology, and so they wrote that sort of history. Later on, even that history got divided into subaltern school. Subaltern school was again part of the left project, but they had different issues. History from below, all sorts of things came in. I don't want to go into detail now, but there was one school, subaltern school of historiography. Now, all these schools were projects of history writing, and they had their own plans, framework, which they followed. All of them had a rigor of scholarship. One can disagree with what they wrote. Left-wing historians like my namesake, Prof. Irfan Habib, disagrees with R.C. Majumdar and Yadunath Sarkar, but respects them as serious right-wing scholars. So these disagreements apart, the mutual respect between these people existed. So this was the scenario where you can see a serious scholarship of different schools. So rewriting history or writing history or understanding history is an ongoing project. So it's not something new. What is new is when you begin writing history by creating new facts, which are not historical facts, which are facts created through WhatsApp propaganda, which have no seriousness. Now I face it quite often. When lots of these press people come to me with a WhatsApp message which has gone viral. So I tell them that you have to go to the person who actually made it viral, because why have you come to me? Because the fact which has gone viral is actually not a historical fact. So today, when you start writing history on the basis of such WhatsApp propaganda and flimsy database without any rigor, then this is the sort of history we want to question. At least I want to question. I will not go along the project of rewriting of history, which is in that form, in this sort of form. If it has a rigor, okay, we'll respect it, though we will disagree.
So, because you mentioned right-wing historians who were credible scholars, now we have many, so-called right-wing historians today, public intellectuals have become very famous, whose books have been bestsellers. People like Dr. Bikram Sampath or J.S.I. Deepak, and people who write history. So, what difference do you see between their scholarship, their rigor, opposed to someone like R.C. Majumdar and Jadungar Sarkar? Do you see their scholarship as valid, or do you think that they're rewriting facts or distorting facts?
So this is not. I don't see even any comparison between these two, because anyone, whether Vikram Sampath or anyone else, if you decide to write a biography of somebody, like I have done Maulana Azad's biography, decide to do a biography of anybody, Veer Savarkar for that matter, if I end up using the sources of the writings, if I want to use the writings of Savarkar alone, or 80% of his writings as my source to write a book or a biography, then for me that is not a rigorous biography. No, you have to use multiple sources, diverse sources which are not directly something which is not coming from his pen. What Vikram Sampath has done is exactly this. Most of the sources are writings of Savarkar. So how will you accept it? How can that be a very objective study? No? So this is not the sort of history which you can call a rigorous history. You have to open yourself to multiple sources which are critical of your the subject, and which speaks about things you may not agree. Contest them, engage with them, interpret them, but don't rubbish them. Don't set them aside. Because any good historian who wants to engage with his or her subject has to look into things which are critical of the subject. You may disagree with that, or you may disagree. You may come with your own arguments to disagree. But you cannot just go ahead without engaging with things which are critical of your character, which you want to idolize or want to write about. So this is what this Savarkar biography has done.
There is a fine line between using someone's own writings as a source versus using other sources. And because I've read the book, he does use other sources and refer to critiques. I don't agree with him, but he does use multiple sources. In your book, you have also used the writings of Maulana Azad, for instance. Where do you draw the line exactly? When you're talking, for instance, about the experience that, say, Savarkar had in jail, then, well, his writings serve as one of the multiple sources that could be legitimately used for writing a biography.
No, I'm not against using the source. You, of course, that source had to be used, because you cannot ignore it. If somebody has written, left behind a record of his writings. You may agree, disagree, whatever. So I'm not questioning why one should not use it. One should use it. Of course, one should use it. But the point is that that should not be the sole basis of what you are going to write. You have to engage with other sources as well. I haven't read the book completely. I've just seen through it. You may have gone through it. I've talked to people who have read it from page to page, So, but they feel that the book is dependent mostly on Savarkar's own writings. Not that other writings have not been referred to. There are. But the main source of information is Savarkar's own works. So on that count, one has to take it with a pinch of salt. My own work on Maulana Azad, I have used him extensively, his own writings, but I have used other things as well. I have given my own views in comments in present context, what is happening today, whether I'm talking of Islam, whether I'm talking of nationalism, how I feel, how I look at Azad in today's India, or today's world. So that way, and then I've used other sources as well, as you must have seen in the book.
Another accusation that is often claimed is that the history that we're taught in school textbook is telecentric, in that well, we're not taught a complete history of India. There is barely any mention of Northeast, or for that matter, Odisha. So I'm wondering if you find that criticism valid.
I find it valid. Absolutely valid. That should have been avoided. And the most of the history which is taught is North centric. And lately, few things have come in. Not because of this government. Even before that, people actually felt this weakness that we have depended on or engaged with North India most of the time. So we have references to South India. India being such a huge country and such a diverse country, and so many languages, cultures, religions, etc., and regions. So it will always remain a problem. And see, another question is, when you talk of teaching is a problem. How much can you teach? There is a question which comes into discussion very often, that you have to bring down number of chapters on history. History itself has been reduced to hardly any. There is hardly any space even now, despite the fact that we agree that our history is not centric. But the point is there is no scope for students in schools particularly, where you can bring in history of the whole country. There's no place. How will you do it? The point is, one need to write history. There is a National Book Trust. There is NCERT books, not textbooks. Otherwise, publishers generally who keep writing, publishing books, they should do it for children, for school-going children. All history cannot be part of the curriculum. That is impossible. And I always say this: the parents, the family, they have to find space for their children to learn something beyond curriculum. Bhagat Singh cannot be taught in detail in textbooks. Impossible. You can't do that. But there are books on Bhagat Singh. I'm just giving you an example, where you can introduce him to young people. Don't expect NCERT curriculum to do that. Similarly, you have to engage with the history of South India, Northeast, Odisha, and other parts of India. But all that cannot come into curriculum, because there is no space. Even North-centric history is being cut out because there is no space to teach. So all that history need to be written, need to be documented. On that, I agree. There is no proper documentation. There are not enough books. even at the school level or at a higher research level. All that need to be done.
But by doing that, are we not privileging a certain form of history over others? For instance, where we read about Gandhi's movement, we read about his philosophy, his nonviolence. So we have a certain idea of how that movement worked out. We don't necessarily read about the ideas of Bhagat Singh or the revolutionaries, people who were in the Anusilan Samiti. We don't read about their ideas. So that in itself is privileging a certain ideological framework over others.
No, Bhagat Singh is we do find mention of Bhagat Singh, and as I said, you can't find a detailed mention of Bhagat Singh. You can't understand him in great detail. For that, you have to read beyond curriculum. So even Gandhi, where is Gandhi in such detail now in the books? Lots of things have been cut out because students have no time to read anything in detail. There's so much else for them to read. So whatever you have to do is you have to do beyond the curriculum, outside curriculum. If you are interested, if your parents are interested in teaching you about Gandhi, about Bhagat Singh, about Subhash Chandra Bose, or about ancient or medieval India, you have to engage. The children have to engage with that if they are so interested. But I think we can't complain. We can't complain and then keep cutting the syllabus each year. So we are doing both the things. We are complaining that these things are not taught, and then we reduce the curriculum and subjects and chapters every year.
So what do you think about the politicization of history? I ask this question because then the question comes up whether all history in itself is political, because you talked about the different schools of history, the subaltern school of history, the right-wing school of history, the Marxist school of history. So there are different schools of history, and each of them in and on itself has political claim, if not a normative claim, at least descriptive political lens through which events are analyzed. So where do we draw the line when it comes to the politicization of history?
See, politicization, there are two different things. Politicization is one. Another is ideological concerns of different schools of history writing. Because I don't agree that there can be an objective history. There is no objective history. When any historian from any background writes history, his or her bias, ideological bias, or his or her own personal choices will surely make an impact. And that is possible. That is for all subjects anywhere, even in political science. If anybody writes, then obviously his or her political concerns will be reflected. What exactly is problematic for me is the lack of rigor. If you do that in a frivolous way and use only history only as a tool to make a political point, that is a politicization. I absolutely agree that whatever there is a left bias in history writing earlier, there is a right-wing bias in history writing, and there are other schools of history writing which have a certain bias. But subaltern school has a different flavor. One can see that. So that is no issue at all. But the point is, one should have a rigor. Interpretation can be questioned. No, I may disagree, but I will not question the rigor of the scholar, whosoever he or she is.
But when we talk about politicians using history, for example, They're clearly not rigorous. It doesn't matter which side they belong to. And their aim seems to be to create an imagined community, as Benedict Anderson pointed out,
Yeah.
through the crafting of a historical myth. And that historical myth, by its very definition, is not nuanced and not rigorous because it aims at creating a certain type of citizen.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say. No, any project which has this sort of a purpose in mind, objective in mind, then that project cannot have rigor. No? Rigor means you need to engage with the past. You need to engage with the sources, interpret them, and don't go with preconceived notions. You can be preconceived in terms of ideology. That's okay. But sources should be sources like what are these like sources also today are varied. Like literature is also a source of history, which it never used to be a couple of decades ago. But literature is a source of history. Oral history is
Oral
a source of
narratives.
history. Oral history is a source of history. And there are lots of other sources beyond the traditional archival sources or classical literary sources. So there are different sources of history writing or understanding the past. But as I say, and I'm part of one of the oral history project of Ambedkar University, and we keep raising this, that oral history on its own cannot be the only source of understanding the past. Oral history is one tool. It has to be cross-checked through multiple other sources. Then only you can believe. Because oral history means if you are talking to somebody, his or her biases will come in, memory loss will come in. So you have to keep all that into account. So that oral history alone cannot be the source. It has to be a source in the context of other contemporary sources to cross-check what you have done. So history writing is a very there is a scientific way of doing it. So you can't go about writing history without understanding what exactly you are trying to do.
Now, I want to come back to your book,
Yeah.
and I want to talk about Maulana Azad. So, why don't you enlighten us about his early years? How did he grow up? What was the environment that he grew up in? What were the ideologies which he imbibed in his early years?
See, he was Maulana Azad belonged to a family which migrated from Delhi before 1857, and they migrated because they felt, and like so many other educated Muslim families of mid 18th, 19th century, they believed that after the British takeover, the East India Company takes over as it looked like. There won't be scope for them or for their scholarship to prosper. They will lose patronage because Mughal Empire used to patronize all these scholars, Sanskrit scholars, Persian scholars, Arabic scholars, Islamic scholars. Like Tulsidas was patronized by Abdur Rahim Khan Khana. They were friends. He was Akbar's contemporary. And there are sources which say that Tulsidas was financially supported by him. So this was an ambience in which all these scholars used to prosper and write. Now, in that situation, his family migrated to Hijaz, to Arabia, and his father, Maulvi Khairuddin, became a scholar, and he studied and became a reputed scholar. He was a Sufi scholar who belonged to Qadiriya Sufi order, Naqshbandi Sufi order, not Chishti Sufi order, which is a little relaxed and which loves music, which enjoys. It has a lot of scope to like Nizamuddin Auliya and Moinuddin Chishti, Ajmer, Chishti Sufi orders. So they are not so Puritan. The Sufi order his father belonged to was a Puritan Sufi order. So Maulana grew up in that family. Mother was an Arab because his father married an Arab woman who was a daughter of Onis, some sources say. of his teacher, and then moved to Calcutta in 1895-96 when Maulana was 7 or 8 years old. Came to Calcutta because large number of rich, wealthy people invited him. They were all his murids, as they say, disciples, while he was in Arabia. And they wanted him to come to Calcutta where they will look after him. So Maulana became a Calcuttan, though the family was from Delhi originally. And so his early life was spent in engaging with his father. His father, being a Puritan, passed on a certain version of Islam to him, with which Maulana disagreed, and I have tried to engage with that in the first chapter. And he actually disagreed so much that he gave up Islam for a while. He was not an atheist. I should not call that he was an atheist, but he surely became an agnostic. And he himself writes that he didn't feel like when saying his namaz and didn't really practice Islam for 5-6 years. Then came back to Islam, which was refurbished Islam, which was Islam which had scope for lots of things, which his father's Islam did not allow him. Like he was a trained musician, and he learned music playing sitar on the quiet. And he did lots of things which his father's Islam couldn't have allowed him to do. So this is how he grew up, and he became like people have actually called him a child prodigy because he finished his most of his education was done at home, because his father didn't allow him to go to any school, because he didn't find any school or any teacher worth teaching him. And his father was also very antithetical towards Wahhabism, and Wahhabi ideology in Arabia was rising in those times. And so he wanted that his son should not be influenced by Wahhabism. So he used to interview lots of his teachers who used to come to teach him and decide whom he should go for. So Maulana was taught at home. He was an autodidact. He taught lots of things to himself. And by the age of 15, he became a full-fledged writer. He launched a paper, Lisanul Sidq, Voice of Truth, at the age of 15, which became very popular. Large number of people used to read that paper in Urdu reading areas. And so this is how he began. All because of this. Sarojini Naidu actually called him that Maulana was actually 50 when he was born. So she said he was so mature that he skipped that phase of childhood. He was born and immediately became a senior person in terms of understanding. Age remained 15, but he was actually 50 in terms of his maturity. So he was one of those people who grew up in this sort of atmosphere, and his early concerns were very Islamic, because he was an Islamic scholar, and his engagements also remained very Islamic in the beginning. Al-Hilal, his paper, raised Islamic issues. He turned anti-imperialist very early in his life. Al-Hilal was full of anti-imperialist rhetoric and arguments. And the British, and this anti-imperialism was not just in the context of India alone. He said the whole Muslim world was colonized. So he spoke on behalf of the whole of Muslim world, including India. So all his writings were full of diatribe against the British, and this is what I have written in the book also, that he became, according to the British sources, one of the most dangerous persons in India, because his writings were provocative. So the British files, intelligence files, declared him as one of the most dangerous persons. And by that time, he has not even joined politics directly. He has not even joined Congress party. His journalistic career turned him into a great, like fearsome figure for the British. So
One
this
of the
was his
things
beginning. Yeah.
One of
Yeah.
the things that comes out in the book, which you mentioned briefly, is the fact that he was truly a polymath with a diverse range of
Yeah.
interests, as comes out in his letters, which I did not know before.
Yeah.
You also mentioned Islam, and you have an entire chapter on his interpretation of Islam in Kubari Khatir, uh, which is, the way I see it is his attempt to reconcile Islam with a version of rationalism. So it would, and I think the term free thinker fits
Yeah.
him perfectly, because he was
Yeah.
open to ideas and willing to listen to the other side, even if the people he disagrees with,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wahhabist, for instance.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether you think Islam currently is in crisis when it comes to its reconciliation with rationalism, and how can Azad help, Azad's interpretation of Islam help uh, us to formulate a version of Islam that can be reconciled with rationalism.
Actually, it is a big challenge today. It was a challenge even during Maulana Azad's time, because when he wrote his Tarjuman al-Quran, he translated and wrote a commentary on Quran. Even in his time, during his time, it was finished in 1930. Uh, Even during his own lifetime, his interpretation was not seen as something very popular. Large number of people did not agree with him even during his lifetime, because it was seen as something ahead of his time. Now we are in 2023, and today, not only India, but Islam is a multinational religion. Islam is 50 plus nations, and Islam is in crisis so many places. And there are so many ways of like there is no Islam. There are Islams. There are different ways of looking at Islam. There is one. So only the Quran is one. Prophet is one. But there are so many diversities within that Islam, where which we need to recognize. Now, what Maulana said, which is so relevant today, he looked at faith in comparative perspective. He said, no faith can be supremacist. Islam is not the only religion. No, Islam is one of the religions. Each religion, and according to Maulana, all religions are monotheistic. Even Hinduism is monotheistic. There can be gods and goddesses, but all Hindus believe that there is creator is only one. And he writes in Kubari Khatir also that I agree, like all these Devis and Devtas, if people use these idols, they use it for concentration, for devotion. That doesn't mean that they don't believe in one God, one creator. Creator is one for all Hindus. These gods and goddesses are manifestations. So on that count, he was very clear that all religions are actually monotheistic. So Islam is not the only religion in the world which is monotheistic, which believes in one God. All religions believe in one God. And then he compares Judaism, Christianity, which I have brought out in the book also. He even mentions atheists like Bertrand Russell and his views. So he tries to cover as much as he could in those times. And I've also tried to bring in most of the reflections, flavors in the chapter on Islam, which can bring out the real Maulana Azad, which the way he looked at Islam. Another thing which is important in today's Islam, which Islam lacks today, unfortunately, is the, which was very important for Maulana Azad, is a critical space. He believed that rationality, you cannot read Quran by locking your brain. You have to open your mind. You have to keep your mind open to lots of things which you see, which you read, which you perceive around you. And on that basis, you have to form an opinion. So Quran cannot be read without using your brains. Unfortunately, what is happening today is that most of the believers, and that is, I have tried to point out in the book also, that Maulana made this comment with which I disagreed in the book. He said that that the believers have to be interpreters of Quran themselves. They don't have to depend on the mullah. Now, Maulana could do it because he was a scholar. His mother tongue was Arabic. Quran is in Arabic. So he had the privilege of understanding, reading, and forming his own opinion, being a son of a scholar himself. So for a lay believer, it is impossible. A lay believer will not have the same sort of understanding as a scholar can have. This is what gives privilege to the Maulvis, and allows them to interpret faith for the lay believers. Now the responsibility is of those who interpret it for the people. They need to be honest. They need to be open. They need to be liberal. Because you cannot expect the lay believer to be a scholar. That is true for all faiths, even in Hinduism. Hardly anybody understands what Sanskrit shlokas are recited. But other religions, Hinduism, if you compare, is different from Islam, because Islam is a religion based on a book, one book. Hinduism is not based on one book. In Hinduism, there are diverse ways of being a Hindu. In Islam, there is one book and one prophet, and Hadith, his tradition. So this is a major difference between Hinduism and Islam. So you cannot actually allow. The point is that there has not been a vernacularization of Quran. Interpretation, translation of Quran in different languages. If it has been done, it has been done in a very limited way. It is not accessible. An aura has been created around Arabic. Arabic has become a language of God. So you have to read Quran only in Arabic, whether you understand it or not, because it's a language of God, because the Quran came in that language, without realizing that it came to the Prophet in Arabia, which was where the language was Arabic. Okay, that's fine. But the point is, if you want to understand, then you need to understand it in your own language. And that is possible only when it is translated at mass level. So by not doing that, a large number of people are not, like, Quran, the book is not accessible to them as believers. So they can only cram, they can only recite, but they can't understand. So what Maulana tried to do was to translate it into Urdu, make it accessible, explain the Quran and its different ayats into the common people's language, and make it understand in comparative terms, in comparison to Hinduism, to Judaism, to Christianity, and to atheism. So this is what he tried to do. But unfortunately, it was not appreciated then, and it is not appreciated very much now.
Well, I agree with that, because when I was reading the chapter on Islam, Maulana Azad's interpretation of Islam, you also quote Mustafa Kior, who I've read, and I could find similarities between the problem that Azad was answering then and that Mustafa Akel is answering now, which is the issue of forming a liberal version of Islam. But you also talked about the limitation to interpretation that is in Islam because of its reliance on one book. So, what what could you say about, say, which version of interpretation in Islam is more superior than others? Do you think that there should be people who, Maulanas or whatever, who should be able to have the last say on the interpretation, or should the people themselves decide for themselves what interpretation they want to adhere to and what they want to reject?
See, I think there's no last word. The last word will never be said. It's always a possibility of something in future. So there's no last word. But the point is that how to engage, because you for a believer, for people who are believers, practicing Muslims, or even practicing Hindus for that matter, because this is true for all religions. The only difference is that Islam is a religion with coded religion with do's and don'ts. Hinduism has no do's and don'ts. There are lots of things which are creeping into Hinduism now. Islamization of Semitization of Hinduism, as some people are trying today, because Hinduism never had these do's and don'ts. It was a very loose religion. You could go and place a chadar at a dargah and still remain a Hindu. This is a privilege which is not allowed to a Muslim, or even a Christian, or a Jew. So on that count, there is not much possibility of actually change or interpretation for that matter. That is why what is happening today is happening. It is happening because there is not much scope. You just cannot allow people to and there is no capability among people, because they are so incapable of interpreting. People have gone into ritual. You have to say 5 times, you have to say your namaz in Arabic, and they all remember that. They follow some rituals which are there laid down in the Quran or in the faith as a practice, and essentials of Quran, as they say. And so they are very clearly laid out. So people just follow that. And nobody cares to or feels it necessary to engage with the book. People have no time. Who will engage with the book? Unless everybody can't become a scholar. So you have to learn Arabic because there is no translation available. There are English translations because there are how many people read English. So for the masses of people all over the world, wherever Arabic is not understood, this limitation will remain.
Now, I also want to talk about Maulana Azad's conception of nationalism and humanism, of course, because you point out the similarities in Tagore's critique of nationalism and his, advocacy of humanism with that of Maulana Azad. But Tagore, for his part, was a staunch critique of all forms of nationalism. That is, he saw nationalism as an evil that is un-Indian, that does not have a place. Unlike Azad, who formed a version of nationalism which he felt was incompatible with humanism, and like Tagore, who said that nationalism is the antithesis of humanism. So how does Azad reconcile nationalism and humanism?
No, Azad accessed it in a different way. But I've brought in Tagore because there is some similarity where he talks about humanism, etc. But Tagore had a very different understanding, and we all know. I'm not really trying to bring in exactly the replica of Tagore's version of nationalism. Maulana is trying to say that first of all, you have to, he very clearly points out in his essay on Islam and nationalism, where he makes a distinction. What is patriotism? He explains what is patriotism. Then he explains what is nationalism. Then he makes a distinction between patriotism and nationalism very clearly. And then from nationalism, he comes to humanism. He believes, and he says in so many words, that ultimately what matters is humanity. You talk of nationalism, you talk of nation, ultimately you have to talk of humans. What is nation is not something very abstract. Nation is formed by humans. Ultimately, what is important is humanity. So that's where he deviates from Tagore's idea of nationalism. For Tagore, the whole definition was very different. For Tagore, nationalism itself was inhuman, is antithetical to humanity. So Maulana is not saying that. He is saying that your nationalism has to be tinged with humanity. This is humanity which ultimately matters. So he is not undermining nationalism. Nationalism is necessary for him. And he's talking of his own idea of nationalism, where he says that we need nationalism which is indivisible, which is cosmopolitan, which is composite, which is empathetic. And he gives examples from Prophet's life. Early example of nationalism, where Prophet in Medina sets up the first Islamic state in Medina when he moves from Mecca to Medina. And there he forms the first Islamic nation. And that first Islamic nation is formed by the Jews and Muslims together. So he says that when Prophet can form a nation in collaboration with the Jews, why can't Muslims in India form a nation in collaboration with the Hindus? So there is an example of the Prophet. Follow that example. Why go after Muslim League's demand for partition to create a Muslim nation? You can form a composite nationalism, one nation, and stay together like the Prophet stayed with the Jews.
Now, we'll come back to Pakistan and the Muslim League's conception of nationhood. But before we do that, I want to talk about Gandhi's influence on Azad. So we were discussing briefly Professor Amin Jahan Beklu, who's my professor and whom you know. He was briefly discussing your book in our class. And we were discussing about the idea of a Muslim Gandhi and the lack of a Muslim Gandhi in contemporary times. And Azad seems to have been very much inspired by Gandhi, and he adheres to nonviolence. So does he formulate a narrative doctrine, let's say an ideology, where he incorporates nonviolence into his interpretation of Islam? And also, what were the relationship between Azad and Gandhi?
You see, there is the relationship was very close. Like Maulana met Gandhi on probably 18 January 1920. That is the time he comes out of exile after 3 years in Ranchi, near Ranchi, where the British had sent him into exile from 1916-17 to 1920. Now, in this period, when Maulana was in exile, lots of things happened in India and the world. For example, the World War was going on. It had ended. Khilafat movement had begun in Turkey. Jallianwala Bagh had happened. Champaran experiment has taken place. Gandhi's first mass movement experiment in Bihar. So all this has happened while Maulana was behind bars. When he comes out, he is in a dilemma what to do, whether to go into a solitude and become a scholar and write about Islam and whatever he wants as a scholar to do, or jump into mass politics against the British, join Gandhi. And ultimately, he decided that he should join Gandhi and go headlong into the freedom struggle. So he meets Gandhi in January 1920 in Bombay, most probably, and where Gandhi meets and he says that I wanted to meet you when you were in exile. I came to Ranchi, near Ranchi, but the British didn't allow me to meet you. Good that we have met now. And both of them clicked the very first day when they met. And that was a relationship which lasted till the end, till Gandhi was assassinated in 1948. Now, when he meets him, broadly he agrees with Gandhian politics of mass movements, of Swadeshi, everything. On ahimsa, on non-violence, Maulana very clearly said that it is not a matter of faith for me, like it is a matter of faith for Gandhi. For non-violence for Gandhi was faith, which was not so with neither with Jawaharlal Nehru, nor Subhash Chandra Bose, nor Maulana Azad, nor with so many others. So on that count, they all went along with Gandhi. Gandhi remained a leader, but their faith in non-violence was not as profound or as committed as Gandhi's. For Gandhi, it was a faith. So for Azad, and he has written at so many places that he agrees with Gandhi broadly with everything, and he remained Gandhi's follower and great admirer all his life. But on certain things he disagreed with him. Then he was one of those who, and I'm saying this to show that he was not a blind follower. He was not a bhakt as we see today, and that is reflected in many ways. Like Maulana Azad was actually the only one who used to smoke in the presence of Gandhi. So this is one example which proves that he was a great admirer and follower of Gandhi, but he knew what he wants to do. Gandhi may not like smoking. He may not like people smoke in his presence, but Maulana had his own views. He sat with him and smoked in front of him. So this is one example. He was his own man, though he was a great admirer and supporter of Gandhi, and he remained so all his life till he met him in 1920. He agreed with him on most of the issues. He had serious disagreements only later on issue of partition. Otherwise, he was a great follower of Gandhi for 20 years, 25 years.
Would you say that he went along with Gandhi on nonviolence because it was pragmatic, that Nehru and Patel and Azad, that all of them agreed that nonviolence, believed in pragmatic nonviolence in the sense that it was the most effective way of doing action, not because it was a matter of principle for them?
Yeah, it was a strategy for them. For Gandhi, it was not a strategy, it was a matter of faith. So that is the difference. For Nehru or for Patel or for Azad, non-violence was a strategy, a tool to fight against the British. And on that count, they agreed with Gandhi that violence is not the option. But they like, for example, Chauri Chaura. And all these leaders went public when after Chauri Chaura, Gandhi withdrew the non-cooperation movement. Nehru disagreed with him. Subhash Chandra Bose disagreed with him. So many other leaders of little lower stature, district level, state level, disagreed with him. But Gandhi remained steadfast in his view that violence cannot be tolerated. Violence cannot be part of his strategy. So people publicly disagreed with him, gave statements against the Chori Chora withdrawal, but they remained with him because they knew the charisma of Gandhi will actually do wonders. Despite disagreements, he remained a leader. So it's not that everybody agreed with Gandhi on everything. There were disagreements, but Gandhi was a figure where, despite disagreements, people had to go along with him, and they went along with him.
Now, would you say the same, or perhaps not, about another of Gandhi's prominent follower, which is Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, often called Frontier Gandhi? Was non-violence a principle of faith for him, or was it pragmatic?
No, he was actually the same. Like he was not very different. The only thing is that he set an example by convincing the most violent tribal community in the region from where Khan Abdul Khan came from. That region is still one of the most violent regions, and we all know. And it was so even those times. It was a tribal society. And he was able to convince all of them to follow non-violence in their lives, in their politics. So on that count, he was a little ahead of others because he practiced in his life, in his politics, day-to-day politics, among his followers, which was a very difficult task. So on that count, he was a little different. But obviously, nobody could reach the level of Gandhi in terms of faith in non-violence. Gandhi was very different because he wrote on non-violence and its virtues extensively. He spoke about it. He experimented in South Africa, not India. India was a place where he came and implemented what he tested in South Africa already. So he came with the tools which were already ready to be used and implemented. Satyagraha and non-violence, boycott. So all that he is Swadeshi. So all that he has experimented in South Africa for years. So when he came to India in 1915, he came prepared with all those plans, and which he very effectively used.
Now we come back to the question that we started with in Professor Jahan Beklow's class, which is a Muslim Gandhi possible, in the sense that, is it possible to have a version of Islamic pacifism in the same sense that we have Christian pacifism of Tolstoy or Gandhian pacifism?
Today?
Yes.
Today, Gandhi is not possible in Hinduism itself. Forget about Islam.
Is it possible to make a philosophical Islamic pacifism argument?
I don't think so. Because we live in a different world. We live in different times. So I don't think Tolstoy can be recreated or Gandhi can be born again in any religion, Hinduism or Islam or Christianity. So these people are not born every day. These people are born once in a while. And we should not attempt to even create a Gandhi because that is impossible. You just cannot create. Or a Tolstoy. Impossible. So even an expectation to have a Gandhi this world, actually we have not been able to even keep him and his ideas alive. Forget about creating a Gandhi. We can't keep him alive and his ideas alive, or see virtues in his ideology. We find problems with him all the time. Even the person who assassinated him is a hero for some. So it is impossible to create Gandhi within Islam or within Hinduism. Impossible.
Now, I want to talk about the Muslim League, of course. Maulana Azad's relationship with Jinnah. Jinnah constantly derides Maulana Azad as basically a Congress showboy who has no independence of mind. and on Pakistan and the partition of India, which Maulana Azad constantly opposes, uh, while Nehru accepts. And there is a sense of sadness that I sense when it comes to when all the leaders of the Congress accept partition and Maulana Azad remains firm against partition. So if you could elaborate on that.
You see, what you began with Jinnah. See, what Jinnah was trying to do, or Muslim League was trying to do, was to target Maulana Azad as a showboy of the Congress, to prove to the world and to the Muslims in India particularly that Maulana Azad is the only one who is against Muslim League. The rest of the Muslims in India are with Muslim League. So this was the main target, and they wanted to prove that by deriding him, by abusing him, by mocking him, by calling him names, using abusive language against him. Jinnah used language very foul and filthy, to which Maulana Azad never responded, even once. You will not find any record anywhere where Maulana responded to Jinnah. He didn't feel necessary that he should respond to it. But attempt was that they should prove that Maulana Azad is a showboy of the Congress. He's an agent of the Hindus. No, this was the word used against him, agent of Hindus. Reason was that they have to prove that the rest of the Muslim community is with the Muslim League, which is a total falsification of facts. Large number of Muslims supported Maulana Azad because Maulana Azad did not become a great leader without any following. He became a great leader because there were large number of Muslims who supported him. And when we say that Maulana Azad failed to keep India united, of course, that we can see he failed. But the point is, he also succeeded in convincing a large number of Muslims to stay back in India. No, because if you see, and I have pointed out in the book also, he sought support from Darul Uloom Deoband, Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madani, and so many others who were supporting the Congress, who were against the Muslim League. They represented, Darul Uloom represented Pasmanda Muslims. We hear about Pasmanda Muslims all the time today also. Backward Muslims, artisans, Ansaris, weavers, all these communities which are not Ashraf, which were not privileged Muslim communities, upper caste Muslim communities. Muslim League represented zamindars, feudal lords, professionals, and upper caste, Sayyids, Pathans, and all that. Because these communities felt threatened. And this fear Muslim League used all through their campaign to prove that if the British leave, you will get no jobs, you will get no business, your lives will not be safe under Hindu majority. And so this was a fear which Muslim League used all the time. And they tried to prove that now, large number of professionals got convinced that you will not get jobs. Obviously, they all got together. What Maulana did with the help of Darul Uloom and other bodies, All India Movement Conference, and so many other organizations which represented the Ajlaf, the backward communities, which were artisans, etc., which were in majority. No, they are in majority even now. So they were convinced that your future in a country like Pakistan is not safe. What will you do there? Because they have no job to lose. They had no land to lose. They were all landless, most of them. They were actually artisans who worked every day. They were all people who worked with hand. So there was no fear of losing a job, and getting a job over there was no prospect, because they didn't need it. So most of them decided to stay back. And I have tested it many times when I talk to people in Western UP, where today the Muslim population is 26%, while the total population of Muslims in UP is 19%. In Western UP, it is 26%. Why? It should not have been like that, because it was close to the place where most of the violence was taking place. This was the region which was the most threatened region. People's lives were threatened. Despite threats, people decided to stay back. Only reason was that a large number of people living here belonged to a section which was under the influence of Darul Uloom, Deoband, and they convinced them that you need to stay back, your future is safe here. And this was the work of Maulana Azad and so many other people. One name which I have referred here, which people don't know, is Allah Bakhsh Samru. Allah Bakhsh Samru was a Sindhi leader, and who was a nationalist, who was against the Muslim League, who campaigned against Muslim League all his life. When Muslim League decided to pass the Pakistan resolution for the first time in their session in March 1940, the Azad Muslim Conference under the leadership of Allah Bakhsh Samru was held in Delhi in April 1940, just a month later, to question Muslim League's Pakistan resolution. And there are sources which say that more than 75,000 to 1 lakh Muslims gathered in Delhi, which is a huge number in those times. The Muslim League decided to show black flags to Allah Bakhsh Samru. They couldn't do that because the number was so huge. So they had no option but to withdraw. And that Allah Bakhsh Samru addressed that meeting, and I have pointed out in my book his speeches, his idea of India, his disagreements with Muslim League, serious disagreements, and his support to Maulana Azad. So this is how this whole idea of people like today, there are a large number of Hindu fanatics who say this Muslim minority in India is actually an unfinished partition project. They all need to go. Why are they here? They need to understand that this large number of people had no idea of what Pakistan is. They just didn't want that. Those who wanted went away, or who felt threatened went away. Otherwise, large number of people stayed back. That's why you have such a huge number of Muslims still in India. So this was the success of Maulana Azad, that he could convince a large number of people, along with so many other leaders who supported him, to question Muslim League and leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his idea of Pakistan.
Now, on the eve of partition, Azad seems like a very sad person, reasonably so. And this is reflected in the speech that he gives in Jama Masjid in October 1947, which I will quote because you quoted in a book. Today, when I see your ashen faces and desolation in your hearts, my mind goes back to the past. Do you remember I called for you, but you pulled my tongue? I took up the pen, but you severed my hands. I wanted to walk, but you cut off my legs. I wished to turn on my side, but you broke it. I had warned you how the forces of poisonous politics unleashed by sinister designs would lead to the tragedy of partition, but you refused to listen to me. You relied on your ignorance, and today you feel as though you're threatened by new dangers. Beautiful words.
Absolutely.
But he also, it also feels like he feels a sense of betrayal from the Muslim community. He feels like they did not listen to him, and that is why they are where they are.
Well, that's true. Obviously, he felt disillusioned, despite the fact that he made such serious efforts to convince them to listen to him, say no to Pakistan. On that count, obviously, he was disillusioned, and he was disillusioned by a large number of people in the Congress party, from Sardar Patel to Nehru and Gandhi, ultimately, in the end. And so obviously he was disillusioned by that, because he was the last man standing. He was the only one who who just kept strictly to the idea of united India, though he had to concede to the fellow congressmen of the time, and like Sardar Patel spoke very, like today lots of people say that Nehru partitioned India, Gandhi agreed for partition and all that. All of them, like Patel says very clearly in 1949 speech in Madras, that people ask me about partition, I very openly say that I have no regrets in agreeing to partition. That was the only choice left for us. So we had no other choice at all, and which is actually the truth, because the sort of situation which had happened, there was no option left, because the whole partition project was patronized by the British. Muslim League was founded by the British, and it was encouraged by the British all through. So it was a project begun by the British in 1905 when they divided Bengal. That was the first experiment. Partition of Bengal was the first actually experiment in partition of India. They could see how it will work, and it worked well for them. 1905 partition, which was reversed later on, but 1906 Muslim League is founded, and that's how the whole politics of Muslim separatism begins, with the patronage of the British, and the patronage continued till the end. So there was hardly any scope left where you could remain united.
I want to end this by asking you about the relevance of Azad to contemporary times and the way to achieve the kind of society that he envisioned, which is a pluralist, inclusive society where all communities of India live together. It is hard to imagine in our contemporary times.
It is very hard to imagine, but sadly, there is no other way to live happily. The only way to live happily together is to forget about differences. This is what Maulana Azad said again and again, that don't talk of differences. Two brothers disagree in the family, but those brothers don't kill each other or run away from each other. They find ways to live together. So we need to find similarities. We need to find common things between us, not things where we disagree with each other. That will only create problem for us, and that is something which one should look for even now, because that is what we are doing. We find we do othering among our fellow citizens. We look for strangers among our fellow citizens, and we do that all the time. Strangers in terms of religion, language, region, caste. So unless we give that up, happy living is impossible. And that is the message which Maulana gave all his life. Not Maulana alone, his contemporaries with him, who wrote, who were very prolific in their ideas, who wrote and left behind a legacy. And we can all read that, but read it to follow it. There's no point in reading it and forgetting. So the point is, you need to read and imbibe that in your lives. Only then you can build an India which is happy.
Wonderful words to end on. I
Thank you.
highly recommend our audience to check out this book. It is a beautiful book, and I loved you because you bring out the relevance of Azad in contemporary times. You talk about his interpretation of Islam, his philosophy, bring out the polymath in him, and it is written in a very accessible style. So I highly recommend people to read it.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Anwesh. Thank you.